Hello. Unlike many of the earlier Victoria Cross recipients, we know a great deal about Neville Howse, the subject of today's video. Neville Reginald Howse was born at Stogazy in Somerset, England on 26th of October 1863, passing his residential surgical certificate on the 17th of April in 1884 and becoming a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, the MRCS, in 1886. Neville Howse emigrated to Australia in 1889, and in January 1900 he was commissioned a lieutenant in the New South Wales Medical Corps and sailed for South Africa to participate in the Boer War. On the 22nd of July, in the Orange Free State village of Vredefort, Imperial troops rode into the area. However, De Wet's Boers opened fire, with deadly effect. Among the first to fall in the forward line was a young trumpeter, who lay shot through the bladder and bleeding severely as his comrades were forced to retreat. Young Lieutenant Howse, however, did not hesitate, charging forward on his horse, threw a vicious hail of bullets to assist the wounded man. The Boer Mausers soon found their target, and the doctor's horse was shot out from under him. Howse, however, grabbed his medical bag and ran forward on foot. Reaching the trumpeter, he dressed his wound and, whilst under fire, lifted the man onto his shoulders and carried him to safety through the fusillade. For his courage, Lieutenant Howse was awarded the Victoria Cross, the first ever awarded to someone in an Australian unit, and the only one awarded to an Australian medical officer. Howse was also promoted to captain on the 15th of October 1900. Howse then returned to Australia on the 8th of January 1901. In 1902, Howse volunteered for service in South Africa again, and departed on the 12th of February 1902 with the rank of Major. He was in charge of a stretcher-bearer company who served in the Western Transvaal. He returned to Australia via England, arriving back on the 7th of November 1902. After being mentioned in dispatches, he returned to his practice in Orange, Australia. He was the mayor of the town when World War I broke out in 1914, and immediately volunteered for active service. On the 14th of August 1914, Howse was appointed to the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force as Principal Medical Officer with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Participating in the action that led to the capture of Rabaul in New Guinea, Howse then left New Guinea to return to Australia on the 4th of October 1914. He travelled to Melbourne where he met with Colonel W.D. Williams, the Director of Medical Services, Australian Imperial Forces, who arranged for Howse to join the AIF as an unallotted medical officer. Howse sailed on the Ovidio along with Williams, Major General W.T. Bridges, Colonel V.C.M. Selheim, Lieutenant Colonel C.B.B. White and other members of the 1st Division Headquarters staff on the 21st of October 1914. Howse was appointed the ADMS of the 1st Division, with the rank of full colonel on the 28th of December 1914. Howse landed at Hell Spit, along with the rest of the 1st Division headquarters at around 0730 hours on the 25th of April 1915. As with much of the Gallipoli campaign, the situation was a disaster, and due to triage issues, several severely wounded men were put on board transports with no more than skeleton medical facilities, whilst lightly wounded men were being given beds on board the full-on hospital ships. The beach was jammed with wounded men, and eventually Howse himself determined to evacuate the entire lot. He sent off over 1,200 men in 2 days. Many senior officers of the Australian Imperial Forces took needless risk in this campaign, including Howse himself, who made a point of ignoring shelling and sniper fire. On the 15th of May 1915, Major General W.T. Bridges, his friend, was mortally wounded by a sniper in Monash Valley. Howse personally brought Bridges on board the hospital ship Gascon on 18th of May 1915. After Bridges died, Howse filled in the death certificate and accompanied his body to Egypt. Howse then returned to Anzac on the 23rd of May 1915. However, Howse was also slowly becoming aware of the dangers of the poor sanitation at Anzac Cove, caused in the main by each unit being responsible for their own area, and resulted in him detaching part of the 3rd Field Ambulance to help sanitize the area. On 3rd July 1915, Howse himself became ill with dysentery and was evacuated to Egypt. He returned to Anzac on the 22nd of July and following the attack on Lone Pine on the 7th of August 1915, Howse himself worked for over 12 hours straight dealing with some of the 700 wounded. The next day, he was himself lightly wounded in the shoulder. For his work, Howse was appointed a Companion of Bath in July 1915. On the 11th of September 1915, Howse became acting DDMS of Anzac. The Director General of Medical Services, Colonel R.H. Featherstone, toured Egypt and Anzac and was appalled by the situation. On the 10th of November 1915, he cabled Melbourne with his recommendation that Howse be appointed as Director of Medical Staff, Australian Imperial Forces. This was duly accepted and Howse officially took over the position on the 22nd of November 1915. Howse returned to Egypt on the 28th of December 1915 following the evacuation of Anzac. He promptly recommended that all medical officers that had served a year in the Australian Imperial Forces captains for 12 months or more be promoted to Major. This was due to the continued expansion of the AIF in early 1916, with their arrival on the Western Front. Howse had to create new medical staffs for the 3 new divisions. New field ambulances were created by reorganising the existing ones on the basis of 2 sections instead of 3, a plan that Williams himself had described on board the Ovidio. After a few months, British authorities forced Howse to conform with their organisation, however, but the AIF readopted the original formation in September 1918. Whilst in Egypt, Howse also reorganised the Dental Corps, as his experiences in New Guinea and Gallipoli had convinced him of the value of dentists. He created 4-man dental units, attaching one of them to each field ambulance. However, despite this, Howse as a doctor was reluctant to accept dentists as equals, and yet more reluctant still when it came to dealing with pharmacists, nurses, and physiotherapists, an attitude which would linger in many militaries even to this day. Interestingly, according to the Australian Boer War Memorial, he refused to give Dr. Janet Greig a commission in the Australian Imperial Forces, despite a recommendation from Featherstone, and he was uncomfortable about the fact that he had over 1,200 female nurses under his command. Australian policy at this time, with regard to the employment of female staff, was driven entirely by the desire to free male medical personnel for combat units, and they employed a higher percentage of nurses than their British counterparts did in order to accomplish this. Howse moved his medical staff to the Australian Imperial Forces headquarters at Horseferry Road in London in April of 1916. From here, Howse administered the medical services of the whole Australian Imperial Forces, including those stationed in Egypt and Salonika, but Howse's focus was always on the Western Front. Sometimes this was to the detriment of the other theatres of war. However, the tremendous casualties in France warranted a large medical organisation in the United Kingdom, and there was constant pressure on the medical authorities to return men to the front. Howse was generous with his promotions, taking the view that his doctors and nurses had given up a great deal to serve with the Australian Imperial Forces. On the 1st of January 1917, Howse himself was promoted to Major General and appointed Knight Companion of the Bath. British authorities seeking to divert Australian medical staff to British hospitals could expect nothing but the most hostile response from Howse and the Australian Imperial Forces Deputy Adjutant General, Colonel T.H. Dodds. But when the German offensives broke on March 1918, Howse took immediate steps to reinforce the medical establishment in France. Continuing his experiment with small cellular units, he created 6 surgical teams, each consisting of a surgeon, an anaesthetist, a theatre sister, and 2 orderlies. These were attached to the 3 Australian general hospitals, but available for use by British hospitals when required. Howse arrived back in England on the 24th of February 1919 to take charge of the repatriation of the sick and wounded. He also arranged with the British authorities for his doctors and nurses to take up what for many was the opportunity of a lifetime: free postgraduate study in British universities and hospitals for their service in the war. Howse was also gazetted a Knight of St John of Jerusalem on the 3rd of June 1919 and Knight Commander of St Michael and St George on the 9th of June. He finally returned to Australia on the 1st of January 1920. In January 1921, Howse chaired a committee on the future organisation of the Army Medical Services. He was appointed part-time Director General of Medical Services in July 1921 with the rank of Major General. However, he retired on the 7th of November 1922, moving into politics. From January 1925 to April 1927, Howse was Minister of Defence and Health and Minister for Repatriation. In February of 1928, he again became Minister for Health and Repatriation and also for Territories. As Minister for Health, Howse strove to improve the treatment of cancer and venereal disease. He purchased over £100,000 worth of radium for medical purposes, establishing one of the first radium banks in the world. He assisted in the creation of the Australian College of Surgeons and the Institute of Anatomy. Interestingly, Howse, a smoker, always maintained that smoking was good for the health, and as Minister for Repatriation, Howse championed the cause of ex-servicemen, particularly disabled ones, and was involved in setting up the Australian War Memorial. As Minister for Defence, he attempted unsuccessfully to amalgamate the medical services of the three services, something which is actually ongoing to this day. As Minister for Territories, Howse was an advocate of the White Australia policy, which effectively stopped all non-European immigration into the country. He also pushed for the development of the new capital in Canberra. In October of 1929, Howse lost his seat in the Labor landslide against Prime Minister Bruce. He decided then to return to medical practice, and returned to England for a few months to refresh his surgical skills. However, while he was there, he was diagnosed with gallstones, and an operation then revealed he had pancreatic cancer. He passed away on the 19th of September 1930 and was buried at London Kensal Green Cemetery next to his father. Thank you all for watching the episode. If you enjoy it, please leave a like, and we'll see you all next time.